The physiology of the body can actually be very different. When a body tenses up, when someone gets so tense that they can't move, the sympathetic nervous system might be activated. Their heart rate may be racing. That's very different than when a body goes limp and somebody starts to dissociate. That's a very, very different process. So just because we're talking about immobilizing defense systems, or just because we're talking about the freeze defense, it doesn't necessarily always mean that the body goes limp and into hypoarousal as opposed to hyperarousal. So let's go into that in more detail right now. So the freeze response. Yes, this is when the body gets frozen and cannot move. But remember, we were talking about the difference between the tense body that cannot act in the face of danger and a limp body. So there's actually a couple of types of freeze that I think is important to go over right here. A psychologist or a mental health professional by the name of Pat Ogden reviews this in her book, Trauma in the Body, which is just an excellent book, and it's also reviewed in the Polyvagal Theory book by Stephen Porges. So type 1 freeze, this is when the body tenses up, but the person cannot act. So the person is hyper-aroused, hyper-vigilant. There is an autonomic, a sympathetic nervous system. The body is frozen, and they're ready to run in the blink of an eye, but they're not running. They can't run in that moment. Why? Oftentimes because if they move in that moment, they'll bring more attention to them, more danger to them. So again, back to the animal kingdom examples that we keep going over. Let's say that deer notices that lion at a distance, but also notices that the lion has not noticed him or her, the deer, yet. So if the deer moves in those moments, it's going to attract attention to him or herself and probably be getting chased from that lion very shortly after. So what happens is the body goes into this hyper-vigilant, hyper-aroused freeze situation, and the body is ready to act on a dime, ready to act or ready to run away as soon as possible. And that's why the heart rate is accelerating. That's why the sympathetic nervous system is activated. But in those moments, they're frozen because they know if they're seen, then they're most likely they know if they move in those moments, what's going to happen is, again, more attention comes to them, more threat, more danger. So it's a survival mechanism for that moment. But the main difference is it's not like they can't move in the moment. It's just that their body is taking over and telling them basically, don't move, don't get caught. If you get caught, you'll be in much more danger. If they do get caught, if the lion does see the deer, then most often what will happen is the deer will go into flight mode and get out of there as fast as humanly possible, but as fast as dearly possible for this example that we're talking about. Another type of the freeze response, the type 2, is, again, this is a hyper-aroused state. The body is becoming very, very tense, but the main difference is the individual is incapable of movement. So this would be a situation where they're just so in fear, they're so threatened that they cannot move at all. Even if the lion notices them in that moment, they can't move. They're just completely frozen. That part of their brain is not working. That part of their body is not working. So freeze, and we're going to talk about feigned death in a moment, and that oftentimes is kind of sometimes thought of as a freeze. Freeze can be both a mobilizing and an immobilizing defense mechanisms. Oftentimes, folks who have freeze trauma or their body has reacted to trauma with the freeze defense mechanism over time, just kind of going along the thing of talking about how these can manifest interpersonally and behaviorally. These folks have adapted to the trauma by dissociating, by being completely checked out of situations. So I think